So we're going now, aren't we?
Hmm.
So your question to me, Donát, just now was, go on.
Yeah, so the question was, what use is Bitcoin, and why has it become so popular all of a sudden
I think that's a really good question.
in this era of COVID-19 pandemic?
This year, so actually in March 2020, it was trading at like $8,500, and then on that day where like the entire market crashed, and people were getting liquidated in stocks and everything, Bitcoin took a massive dump to like $3,500, and I wish I'd bought some then. But why? What is its use? I think you've got to go back to first principles on this. So you've got to ask yourself, first of all, what is money? Because I think if we don't get the first principles down, we're not going to understand what Bitcoin is and why it's so significant. So what's your understanding of what money is?
Well, it's a way to assign value to things, so that you can trade with the work. So you work and you need, and that produces value, and you have to. So money helps you to assign the amount of value that your work is worth. If that makes sense.
I think that's a probably much more accurate insight than most people hold of money, because when you ask a lot of people what's money, they'll point to they'll kind of get their wallet out of their pocket and go, oh well, money's this is money, but no, it's not. This is currency. This is the way that the government in this country have told everyone that they need to transact. They call it legal tender, because this is what you're legally allowed to take for payments of debts and things like that. But money, I think, yeah, you're right, is the medium by which we assign and transact value between people. And so it's closely related to work, because work is what is work? Work is the creation of value to others by spending the rarest resource that you have as an individual, the thing that is equal amongst everyone, which is your time. You and I and the millionaire and the person without anything all have the same amount of time in the day. Of course, there's certain opportunities that you can make use of, and certain opportunities that aren't available to you, to how you spend your time. But time is the rarest resource, right? So when you're going to work, what you're effectively doing is trading off your time. You are selling your time and energy to somebody, and in return they give you, I suppose you'd call it, the most fungible, most easily transferable asset, which is money. And so we get paid, either at the end of every week or every month, generally by just, direct transfer, numbers on a screen into your bank account. Some people pay cash in hand. Again, it's all pretty much the same. It's all money. But the answer that Bitcoin gives is that it's better money than the money we've got. In fact, it is the best money that humanity has ever seen.
All right. So why is that?
That's a really good question again. Think back to how people used to transact and how people used to transmit value between one another. So what do you think people used to do to do that?
Well, are we talking before the invention of coin, or are we talking?
So we're going back way back, the start of money. So the ancient history of money.
Well, you'd
from a
give
transaction.
a portion. You give a portion of your sheep to someone,
Mhm.
or you'd build some tables,
In
and in
exchange,
exchange for that, you would get some, I don't know, camels.
Mhm.
Um,
you've
so
got
you trade.
a barter system, right? So you kind of say, I've got a chicken. I need some corn to make some bread. The chicken at the moment isn't that valuable to me because I've got 100 chickens at home.
Mm.
But I know my neighbour's got a cornfield and I don't, so he's got a resource that I can't access.
Mm.
And so what you've got a barter system where people are exchanging certain goods with one another. But that's got a whole host of issues, hasn't it? So you've got an equivalence issue.
Mm.
For how do I know my chicken is worth this much corn?
Mm.
What if the farmer next door has a bad year and he only produces half as much corn as he did last year? Well, this year it's twice as valuable to him.
Mm.
But I've got 200 chickens this year because they all laid a lot of eggs and a lot more chickens hatched.
Mm.
So my chicken effectively is only half as valuable to me as it was the year before. So you've got your equivalence issue. You've got your, the issue of, what happens if your neighbor just doesn't fancy having a chicken, but you really need his corn. So you've got the issue of, matching up your desires. So you desire incompatibility with a barter. So that's why we then, progress on to things like shells or bits of stone. And what does that do? Well, it gets rid of your equivalence issue because you can always agree that this amount of rock is gold. Gold's just a shiny rock. This amount of gold is always worth X number of chickens or weight of corn. It also gets rid of your desire incompatibility because what you can do is you trade for this third asset and then at a later time you can keep that and you can spend it on various things, but you can keep it for a later time when you actually really want something and then spend it. You've got a store of value over time. You then kind of progress into issues of purity, especially with kind of gold standard. So you kind of get the Romans who are clipping coins where they're kind of shaving off the edge of the money just to keep a little bit on the side for themselves. But obviously that then devalues the actual worth of the coin because the metal content's less. You've got issues of kind of transacting over large kind of distances as well. So if I'm driving my pigs to market and they're worth quite a significant amount, I'm not really going to want to carry a sack full of gold back home. I'm in danger of being robbed and all that. So then you get into a kind of ledger system. And your ledger system is where you have a guy at the market who has a big book. What's he do? Well, he writes down the value of your pigs in his ledger. And then the next time you're at market, you don't have to take any coin with you. You don't have to take anything that's at risk of being stolen because the guy in the ledger can say, okay, so you want to trade with, so-and-so across the market. You want to buy some wine from him. Well, what I'll do is, it looks like you've got 1,000 gold coins worth of value in this ledger. I'll strike off that. I'll write 995 underneath, and I'll add 5 to his account, right? And then essentially you've transacted with 5 gold pieces worth of value. You can take the one because it's in his account now.
So it's like a back, but like really old.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, and in fact that's where the word bank comes from. So it's in Venice.
You have to pay the ledgers with the guy who's doing the
So yeah, he'll want to take a cut for the services he provides, absolutely. What if he's not honest? You know, it's very easy just to have a slip of the pen, you know, an accidental stroke that adds an extra zero here, knocks an extra zero off there.
Yeah.
And so what you're doing is you're essentially putting your trust into a trusted third party, which is a bit of a security hole for your value, essentially. And so we've kind of progressed on to, you know, getting up towards the modern day. You have building societies, you've got banking institutions, they're fairly sophisticated, still operating largely on a gold standard where their currency is pegged to the value of gold. Up until, you know, the 30s in America. America comes off the gold standard. FDR kind of has people, what they call amnesty, like all the gold that they've taken out of the banks. And then it's really not long after they do that, it's like 2 or 3 months, then they basically just start printing loads and loads of money through the Federal Reserve. And obviously there's an issue when you don't have your currency pegged to something which has agreed upon value. And then you just say, actually, this historic store of value, gold, that's largely in irrelevance now. We own it. We, the government, own it. You, the private citizen, don't own it. And we're going to mandate that you use this currency for every transaction that you have. And of course, people can go back to the barter system, but you've got all the issues with that, and you know, very good issues, which is why we've moved away from it. Because ultimately, the hardest money in history always wins out, because people realise that it's better store of the value, it's more easily transacted with, and so people use that over time rather than the softer kind of money. And so you've got the system where the governments are all now off the gold standard. They're printing, you know, like there's no tomorrow. You know, we saw in the budget this week, didn't we, where what's his name, Rishi Sunak is kind of saying, oh, you know, we've spent 600 billion quid or something, and we're going to spend another, like, I don't know how much. You're getting into kind of billions and billions and almost, well, certainly in America's case, trillions of dollars worth of value that's being printed out of thin air. And what does that do to the value of the dollar you already hold?
Right, reduces it.
Yeah, completely devalues it. So, you know, this is the...
Hey, Abby.
Hello. Yeah. So there's a reason why your bread and milk costs more than it did 3, 5, 10 years ago. And you know, there's all these great...
It's because the money's worth less, isn't it?
Of course, yeah, it's worth less because it's worthless. Because it's not backed by anything. And so, yeah, they're just devaluing everyone's time, ultimately. Because you've got all these questions about, oh, you know, raising the minimum wage to a living wage, you know, and it goes up every year to keep track with inflation, which is great. You know, I'm glad they're discussing the effects that inflation has on people's ultimately well-being. But there's no question as to why this is necessary. Why do we need to raise wages every year? It's because they're printing and printing and printing, and it's completely divorced from the actual value that is within the economy.
Hmm.
So, you know, people start saving for a pension, and then 45, 50 years down the line, that pension, when they come to collect it, has half of the purchasing power as it did when they started to save.
Hmm.
So what that's effectively done is through inflation, it's robbed them of half of their working life, because they've now only got 25 years of value instead of 50, which is, you know, it's a real difficulty. So what's the answer? Bitcoin answers this, because what Bitcoin does is, in really simple terms, it has a ledger. So it's a ledger system which is not controlled by a single trusted third party.
Okay.
Instead, everyone has a copy of the ledger.
Okay.
And so what it means is that each CPU, each computer processing unit, which runs the Bitcoin network, which is called a node, has access to that public, completely auditable ledger. And it has to be driven on a consensus basis. So if a majority of the nodes agree with what's on the ledger, then that is accepted as having happened. And then it's built upon after that. So, you know, if you've got a bad actor on the network who decides to add an extra zero to their own account, you'll see that the nodes will reject it. And so you can't fiddle with the numbers, basically. What it also does is it allows you as an individual to store your value in something that is not going to get inflated away, because through the code that has been written, essentially there's this, it's called mining. We kind of use all these, you know, analogous words just to help us understand it. So you've got mining, you've got your Bitcoin wallet, you know, you've got your Bitcoin, so which is essential information, and information that tells the rest of the network, I own this portion of the network, and they all agree, and they say, yes, you do. You own this percentage of all the total Bitcoin that are ever going to be produced. The way they're produced is it's linked to the kind of verification of transactions. So because it's all cryptographically hashed, so all of it is kind of kept in strings of letters and numbers. What the network needs to function is computer processing power, which validates those transactions and comes up with the encryption. And each time one of those hashes is discovered or arrived at through these mathematical kind of what's called calculations, the system will then reward the first CPU to that answer with a set number of Bitcoins. When half of the total remaining amount have been mined, then you get what's called a halving, and the reward is also halved. So at the start of the network, when it came online, you know, 2009, 21 million coins, and only 21 million will ever be produced. So as soon as you mine the 11,500,000th coin, the reward is halved. We've gone through three halvings. So we've gone from 50 to 25, 25 to 12.5, and 12.5 to 6.25. So we're in the fourth halving cycle. And that's only going to get less and less over time. So it's exponentially rarer over time. And that's a real benefit, because with gold, we don't know the total amount of gold in the world. Right? We know how much we've mined. We can have a fairly good guess at what private individuals own, etc. But we don't know how much is left. So I saw a video the other week. There's a kind of Congolese village that discovered that like a hill at the back of their village was just like full of gold. And great for them. Absolutely. That's a natural resource that they can take charge of, if the kind of Chinese government don't decide to buy up that bit of Africa. But what does it do but actually decrease the confidence in the gold that we already have?
Right.
If there's extra demand for gold, there's always mining techniques get sharper. People get more motivated to go and mine gold, look in areas that they've not looked already, etc., etc. And so the actual gold supply is also inflating about it's like 2.3% a year. Okay. So again, you've got the issues of inflation. With Bitcoin, it's impossible to mine more or mine faster.
Okay.
So what you've effectively got is a deflationary currency that actually increases its value over time, because as more and more people desire it, as more and more nodes join the network, and it gets more secure, because you can't pile in that many CPUs to override the consensus mechanism, it gets more valuable.
But then after a while, doesn't that lead to the fact that other people can't get Bitcoin anymore because there's only a limited amount?
Yeah, good point. So there is an absolute scarcity of Bitcoin. There will never, ever, ever be more than 21 million. However, there is.
Didn't it start with 50 million? Isn't that what you said?
No, it started with 21 million available, and it issued each block. So each block that was mined gets 50 Bitcoin as a reward.
Okay, I see.
Yeah. So there's an absolute scarcity, but there's a really good degree of divisibility, because it's literally information. So what you can do, and at the moment it's divided to kind of 8 decimal places. So you can own, if you so desired, 100 millionth of a Bitcoin, right? And that would be your total stake claim on the network. So those little kind of subdivisions are called Satoshis, after the pseudonymous proponent of Bitcoin. We don't know who it was. I'm going to call him a guy because that's how he kind of introduced himself on forums and everything. But a guy called Satoshi Nakamoto. Could have been an individual, could have been a collective. Literally nobody knows. But he kind of, produces all the ideas in this white paper, which is really short. It was really dense, but it's like 8 pages. Talking about all these things, the fact that you can't double spend it because of the ledger, proposing, the kind of algorithms that kick this information out. Yeah, you kind of subdivide it to 8 decimal places, so you can own one.
Hold on a sec, hold on. Yeah.
And there's no real reason that you can't subdivide it even further, you see, because it doesn't change the fact that there's only ever going to be 21 million of them. So the value will stay the same. You'll just have more decimal places that you can access.
So you just have little, like smaller and smaller bits of that value rather than the value changing.
Yeah. So it's like a pizza, if you want to eat a whole pizza, do you eat it in 4 slices or 8? Well, it doesn't matter.
or 100 millionth of a slug.
Exactly. So yeah, you've got, real questions over, is it good for the environment because it uses a lot of energy? And the answer to that is yes, it uses a lot of energy, but that is proof that it is a secure network. Because I remember reading something like a couple of weeks ago, like Bitcoin now uses more energy than Argentina does in a year. And I think, great, because that means even if a country like Argentina wanted to devote all of their energy resources to taking over the Bitcoin network and taking it down, they couldn't do it.
So there's still Bitcoin to be mined, which has not been mined.
Yes, but if you,
but when you get to half of that being mined, then the value, like I'm trying to work out.
Yeah. I mean, on an individual basis, it's not worth mining it anymore, and it only ever was worth mining it in the first year or two. Currently, like this year, we're projected to reach like 95% of all the Bitcoin ever to be produced.
Okay.
When I say it's exponential, like is really hard to grasp if we don't understand like exponentials. But it basically means that all of the Bitcoin will be mined by like 2140. But in the next few years, like the mining rewards are going to be minuscule compared to the total size of the network, but they might be very, very high in value indeed if the network itself expands to where I think it's going to go. So, do you remember, when did you first get a computer that could connect to the internet? What year?
Probably around 2003, 4.
Mm-hmm. We got ours in 1998. I remember it because, and my was it expensive. It might be 99 actually, but we had it before we moved. So yeah, it was like late 90s, and you're talking like in 1995, there were about maybe like 70-80 million people using the internet. In 2005, there was well over 1 billion. And today, like 60% of the world use the internet on a regular basis. In 1995, if somebody told you that, you'd be able to essentially be talking to somebody as if they were face to face, from hundreds of miles away in real time, and be able to record that conversation like we're doing, so that other people at a completely separate point in time would be able to access that and learn from the insights, you'd say you were mad. Like, people just wouldn't understand it. What Bitcoin does is it does the same thing for value as the information, or as the internet did for information. And it's really exciting to me.
So what exactly do you mean by that?
So it removes the third party trust issue, where you have to rely on someone else giving you permission to move value across space and time. It removes the ability for governments to devalue your worth by printing money out of thin air, and it allows people who perhaps haven't been able to access financial institutions to do so and to transact across the world virtually instantaneously. So
let's say everyone got Bitcoin in the world, right? That would mean that the 21 million Bitcoin would be split 7 billion ways.
Yeah, absolutely.
And obviously in differing amounts, because some people would have more or some people would have. But then my question is, because like as time goes on, the amount of value being produced in the world, in theory, increases, right? Hello.
Yes. Yeah. It does. Yeah. Absolutely. So
well, he's so big.
Because I mean, people.
Hey, Elliot.
Prime example here. People are being produced all the time, right? So, because of the time and energy and value in this little person across his lifetime, there is going to be more value in the world because there's going to be more people to work and transact and essentially be human, right? Being human is a valuable thing. So over time, again, you know, there's an increased value for Bitcoin to encompass. Now you've got to think at the moment we are in the very, very early stages of its adoption. Okay, it's only been around for 12 years. I wish I'd got into it sooner. I thought of doing so in 2013, never did it. And I'm pretty convinced that everyone who joins Bitcoin will always consider that they've done so too late. Anyone who sells Bitcoin, which I think is one of the more profoundly idiotic things that you can do, will always consider that they left it too early, and they will regret that in years to come. We are at the very bottom slopes of an S-shaped adoption curve, right? You see this S-shaped curve in virtually every technology that has come across us in the last 500 years. You know, S-shaped curve in the adoption of the steam train, in the adoption of the automobile, in the adoption of the telephone, television, radio, internet, Google, Facebook, mobile phones. There's no reason to think that it wouldn't be different with Bitcoin. And so there will be a time in the next, I guess, 10 to 15 years where the vast majority of people will join, and then you'll get the latecomers in like 20 to 25 years. Mainly the people who've kind of benefited from the legacy financial systems, who just can't let go of the fact that they've done successfully under the dollar and the pound and the euro. But there is a first.
What would happen is, would we pay for everything with Bitcoin? It's
possible.
So you would go into a shop and you'd be like, that piece of bread is like 0.1 Bitcoin.
I think there's a long way to go before that happens. I think that if it does, it won't be expressed in the way that it currently is in terms of the denomination.
Yeah, obviously you'd have to change that because it's not very efficient.
Because obviously there's just a kind of basic human kind of function over the fact that you
I reckon you just have different names of like something coin, and then that would be like smaller and smaller amounts.
Yeah, but ultimately it'll all be built on the Bitcoin network. You know, people don't understand small decimal places, so you just don't express it with a decimal place. You just call it like, 100 satoshis. Or the issue is, if it's a deflationary currency, you're going to not want to spend it because it will increase in value over time. So your car that you buy, like Tesla started offering Model S's or whatever it is for like 2 Bitcoin. Well, in 5 years' time, that could probably buy you 100 Teslas. But there's a story of a guy who spent 10,000 Bitcoin on 2 pizzas when those pizzas were worth $40 from Papa John's. And
what?
yeah, 10,000 Bitcoins, like in 2010.
Why?
Because that's worth hundreds of millions of dollars now. However, right, and here's the real kind of where it messes with you, is that is still worth the same in the terms of the Bitcoin. So that was a 10,000 Bitcoin transaction, and if he'd made it today, because it's only ever a portion of the network, like 1 Bitcoin will always equal 1 Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So
well, because the currency around change, like the actual currency around it changes.
And you've got it quicker than most people I speak to about this. When the news says Bitcoin's gone up again, Bitcoin's hit an all-time high. No, it didn't.
It's the currency that's changing, not the Bitcoin.
The fiat currency is the shifting sand. And so in a world where the currency that we're told to use is changing all the time, is really inconsistent, and will provide you with half as much purchasing power as you actually put into it when you started saving for retirement, it makes sense to have the hardest money that we've ever seen, because the hardest money always wins out. People realize it, and then they start using it, and then it gets to mass adoption, and then people look back and go, how on earth did we ever think about bartering a chicken for a piece of corn?
So I don't know, I'm still trying to figure out how that works in terms of the extra value that would be made in the future.
It's able to accommodate. I mean, after all, the network is just information, so it's just able to accommodate it. Like, you know,
but if let's say you create, I'm trying to think of a good analogy. Let's say you make something that I'm just not going to think of anything, but let's say you make something that means it's got like a certain amount of Bitcoin value, right? And something else comes along which you can get, so it's better technology, but you can get it more easily. So that means that its Bitcoin value should be less, right? Because it's more easily dispensable. So that would mean that the amount of Bitcoin it's worth would decrease. But then the old technology would still be worth more Bitcoin.
No, because you answered your question in your question. You said it's better technology, and it's more easily obtainable. Okay, so there is a value proposition in assets that are difficult to acquire. Absolutely, that's why gold is so valued. However, gold is selling at about $1,600 an ounce. I don't know the precise kind of figure, but only about $150 to $200 of that is actually the value that it costs to get it out of the ground and get it to the customer. The rest is just speculation, right? So yes, in a sense, the more difficult that a new technology is to produce, the more valuable it is. But think about it the other way around. The easier it is to produce, the more ubiquitous it can become quicker and change people's lives quicker. So in a sense, the easier it is to produce, the more valuable it is.
But what I'm trying to say is, it would mean that the old technology has like a certain amount of Bitcoin attached to it, right? So the value of getting that technology with Bitcoin would be a certain number. Okay.
Yeah.
As a new technology comes along,
Yep.
you'd have to change in order for it to be sensible, you'd have to change the value of the old technology in terms of how much Bitcoin it costs. So what my question then is, then the Bitcoin doesn't change, but there will still be some sort of inflation around the Bitcoin. Because it wouldn't make sense for the old technology to be worth more Bitcoin than the new.
No. I'll give you an example. You and I are on a desert island. Okay. On this desert island, we both need to eat to survive. And I am really good at catching fish with my hands. And you are really good, because you're that much faster than me, at catching rabbits who live with your hands. Okay. So in that entire economy, just imagine we've got a Bitcoin each. And that we've got some way of transmitting that information between each other. In that economy, we've got rabbits and fish, and we can both eat them, or we can both trade them, or we can use the Bitcoin to trade the value of them. Okay. Now, over time, we decide that I might want to eat some more rabbit than you can actually physically catch in a day. What do I do to get you to catch more rabbits? Well, I strip some bark of the palm tree and I make it into a net, which enables you to catch twice as many rabbits. And then over time, you decide that you want to eat more fish than I can catch in a day. What do you do? Well, you get a branch from a tree and you whittle it into a spear, and then I can use that to spear twice as many fish as I can catch with my hands. Right. So this net and the spear, they are called capital goods because they contribute to the entire economy. And essentially, there is now more value on the island than there was before. Still the same number of Bitcoin. And so we transact using that. But over time, the capital goods in the world increase and they might get more refined. You might turn my spear into a spear gun. You know, I might automate your rabbit catching net in some way. There's still the same number of Bitcoin, but over time, your society and your civilization grows and matures because there's an incentive to do so in the fact that it's a deflationary currency and it gets more valuable over time.
But
so if I'm, for example, getting my bathroom redone, yeah, and I want a really good job of it, if we were on a Bitcoin standard, the incentive would be for the craftsman to do the best possible job that he could. Because if not, I'm going for another person who's going to do me a better job, save me that much more time, effort, and energy, and reward him in a currency that is more valuable than that. Now, I do think, like not a lot of people within kind of, I don't know what you call them, Bitcoin circles. A lot of people thinking of this have really grasped this yet. But the fact that it is a completely hard money and is deflationary may disincentivize people spending it over time, and in fact should. But it should fully incentivize people earning it. What I think will eventually happen is people will have Bitcoin as their essentially store of value. They're kind of life savings, essentially, where they store all of their, time in monetary format, basically. There'll probably be another type of coin which is more akin to an inflationary currency that we've got, where it doesn't actually matter so much whether you spend it on a 99p coffee at McDonald's, because it won't be 99p, then it'll be like 99 whatever that new currency is, and people will borrow against the value of the Bitcoin that they hold.
I'm still trying to work out how it works in terms of value that's created.
So at the moment we talk about GDP, don't we? Like gross domestic produce, and this is a pretty kind of rough, crass kind of calculation of what is the value of a total economy, and what's the value of the how much value is produced in the world every year. But Bitcoin doesn't operate on a GDP standard, because you don't have to measure it across a year. Bitcoin has the ability to encapsulate all the future value in the world.
But that means, but that in the process of doing that, it changes, and that's why my intuition says if there's a change, even though the value of the Bitcoin doesn't change, but there is a change in the amount of Bitcoin that's assigned to things, because obviously the more is being used, the more you have to divide the cake, and that's where the change comes in. And that's why I'm just thinking, whether does that actually work out, or are we in fact getting a reverse inflation where we're not, the money isn't increasing, it's decreasing, but the same thing is happening. Yeah. So you're just dividing instead of multiplying, but actually you're essentially doing the same thing.
So historically, deflation has been seen as a terrible thing. It means that people don't spend as much, and they don't they don't contribute to a growing economy. But what is this economy that we're under, apart from something that is completely run on the lines of debt and high time preference? I want this and I want it now. And what does that do apart from produce inferior goods and services? So if you've got something that's the opposite, over time, people have a lower time preference. They're more willing to wait for things of quality. So I'll give you an example. Just up here is a housing development, right? And they have thrown the houses up because they've bought the land with debt, and they are selling them as quick as they can. And those houses will last for 50, 60 years, if you're lucky. And then, that's what, 2 generations?
Yeah.
The way we used to build was we used to save harder money than we have now. You kind of accumulate your value, then you assign it to the project, and those houses have lasted for hundreds and hundreds of years. It's exactly why we find it really hard to get Jesus' parable in Luke of the guy who builds the tower, and he says, which is setting out to build a tower will not evaluate the cost before you set out on the building project.
Just going to look in the ensuite.
Good. So, what what's the issue? The issue is that we, on the whole, live on a fiat standard and it makes us fiat people. Right? Our money isn't real, and our interactions with people and the value we assign to relationships and the enjoyment in the work that we do, to the degree that our money is fake, is also fake. And that's like a really, weird philosophical point. I don't think people will grasp it immediately. But the better your money is, the better your life ends up being. Because you actually then end up assigning the value to the work that you do and the value to the relationships that you have in accordance with the value that the money has.
So I'm really trying to work this out. If we have, let's say, like at the moment we've got, this is it might not happen, but let's say we've got LCD screens that we all using most of the time, right? Mm-hmm. What if the new technology is, we get like sort of foldable screens which you can just put in your pocket, and you can fold it out, put it out wherever you want to, which is probably not going to happen because it's a bit of a silly technology, but like essay to that new stuff is obviously more valuable for a while until everyone starts buying it, and then its value goes down because that, like, it becomes easier to produce it, right? You can produce more, and you get it for cheaper. So it's not as valuable.
But you still
so there's a
there.
Sorry,
you're still thinking on the fiat standard there. So
yeah. So but I'm trying to convert that from then to the Bitcoin system. So what would happen to the amount of Bitcoin you own? Rather the amount of Bitcoin that new technology will be worth as that happens.
So with
what happens to its Bitcoin value? That's my question.
Completely capped monetary supply, which Bitcoin has, the total addressable market that a new technology has or new innovation has is directly associated with the actual value to people that technology has. So you don't get innovation for innovation's sake. You don't get planned obsolescence where they want you to buy a new thing in 3 years' time. You essentially encourage better innovation that actually deals with problems that people have. So if you move on to a Bitcoin standard, you won't end up having a Netflix streaming service that wants to take up every.
Is that cake?
Well, it is. It's very good cake, Bitcoin-worthy cake. But you don't end up having kind of these, great technologies that take up 90% of your waking hours. And oh, by the way, you pay us a monthly fee for it as well. And we can just increase that fee at any point. It ends up encouraging entertainment that makes people better people in a sense. And obviously you and I know that man is totally depraved and God does the work of making people better people. But you spend more time with things that actually matter because your time preference is lower.
It's going to take me a while to get my head around this, but
I'm not surprised.
But then what would happen to the value of the new technology? So I know I'm still thinking of the old system, but would it be given a set Bitcoin value at the start, and then that's all it ever is?
No, it's people assigned to it. So bear in mind that the network is just individuals, right? It's a collective whole. And so if I wanted to spend half of my Bitcoin stack on something that I thought was great, then I would need to assess whether I thought it was so great that I'd be willing to lose half of my total purchasing power on it.
But then, I mean, practically that would, if everyone is spending different amounts, that doesn't make sense in the sense of.
Well, it does, because they've got their own preferences. What it goes back to the first principles of what money is. Money is a way for us to transact value to people. So if I think that what I want is so valuable, I'm willing to spend X amount on it, then I'll spend it.
But the problem is the value that's created doesn't come from the people spending on it. The value that's created, it depends on the person making it. So what I mean is, if a person spends 10 hours on making something, then that's 10 hours worth of work. Okay, like let's say it's really high quality. So it's 10 hours worth of work that's really high quality. Now, if someone pays for that, like we're talking big terms here, but let's say someone pays for that 10 bitcoins, but someone else only decides I'm going to only pay for it 5 bitcoins, then you've got the problem of actually, well, who's right there? Like who's giving it the right amount of value? And it's not fair. That's not a fair system, because then everyone's paying you different amounts. It's like if you had a wage, if your hourly wage differed based on like who's in the office that day, kind of thing.
Value is subjective to an extent. You know, there is an objective amount of value in a washing machine for almost everyone who buys one. And that objective amount of value is, this will save me a certain number of hours in a week and a certain amount of energy that I'll use. However, there's a subjective amount of value in a washing machine as well, which is why we have hundreds of different models, because some people might want a black one and some people might want a white one, and they're willing to spend different amounts on it as well. So,
but the point is, you get the same thing for the same amount of money. So if the specific kind of washing machine you buy, that will be the same amount of money across the country.
always.
Or not necessarily across the country, but if two people go into the same store, they will be able to buy it for the same price. Whereas with Bitcoin, what you're saying is one person would go in and buy it for this much, the other person for that much.
Yeah.
Like that is quite problematic. Like how does that work out for the people who made the washing machine?
I think stopping the maker setting a price on it, it just has to be a price that appeals to the market. And it has to be a price that appeals to individuals who would then be willing to, and a price that appeals to individuals in relation to the actual value of the good or service. So what you'll find is, if we end up on a Bitcoin standard, housing prices will actually become affordable, because people will assign the value, and only the value, of living in a house to them. There won't be any speculation in housing prices. There won't be any kind of rising market, constantly rising, always rising, always there a housing bubble. Well, the reason there's a housing bubble is because people are trying to find a store of value for their wealth. The value of art and sport and will revert to what they're actually worth.
But that's the reason why that makes me skeptical, is because the reason why we have the fiat system that you're mentioning is fundamentally, I don't think it's because the money is bad, but because the people are bad.
Yeah, fiat men.
So the thing, like I can imagine the same thing happening to Bitcoin. So it's not like, so for example, the house example, people are not going to value the same house the same, based on, like, each individual is going to value it like different based on what they want.
Yeah,
and
but
it's likely that what they want is going to be a selfish motive.
but people don't have to value that the same, because ultimately in a transaction there's only ever two transacting parties. So it doesn't matter who's on the end of the transaction. What happens is the transaction takes place between the most interested buyer, the one who is actually willing to part with their money, and the seller. And so, you know, a seller also needs to appeal to the most interested party. So if a seller wants to sell at 200,000 and there's no interested party, that's a clue that the price discovery point is below 200,000. So when you're talking price discovery, what you're doing is you're talking the meeting of minds over the value, subjective, objective, or otherwise, of that particular good or service at a particular point in time. So you can do that with Bitcoin.
But yeah, but that's
taking
so
it also increases in value over time.
When it comes to technology that's produced en masse,
mm-hmm.
You no longer have just two parties. You then have 1 million people and one company.
No,
so
because you're talking that the million people are the market that the product is addressing, but at any point you can single out any single transaction, say this buyer was interested in this. You know, these technology companies are not selling to people who don't want to buy. That's what advertising is trying to convince people who don't want to buy to be interested in buying. And it's one of the great evils of our age is spend your value on this stuff that you don't actually need. You don't really want it, but we've convinced you to want it. Like that goes away in a Bitcoin system, because people grasp the actual value of the actual stored time and energy they've got in their money, and they take a second look and go, do I really need that? So what it does is it gets rid of waste. It reduces unnecessary energy consumption. You can divert your resources into things that actually matter. You know, we can't fully grasp the full implications of it, because what you're talking about essentially is a system that if you know certain information, you own a portion of the total future wealth of the human race. And that's pretty mind-blowing, I think. Which is why I'm in at the bottom of the S-curve, because I know that as more people pile into it, it's simple supply and demand. The supply is not there for the demand that there will be. You know, there's 48 to 52 millionaires in the world currently. That's not even enough to have half a coin each. And you're talking about institutions that already own hundreds of thousands of them. So the total free float is somewhere between 3 and 4 million, I reckon, if you take into account all the ones that have been lost as well. By the way, people losing Bitcoin is great for the network, because it means that the total value of the remaining coins goes up as well.
Well, on another note, though, what do you think this means in terms of, because what we're really talking about is one world currency, right?
Good question. Yeah, I thought you were going to ask.
Like, if everyone goes into Bitcoin, we're in seriously dangerous territory in terms of biblical things. Because if you have a one world currency, that's one step away from having a one world government.
No, because the government. No, I don't think it is. Firstly, I'm going to say it now. Bitcoin is not mentioned in the Book of Revelation. Book of Revelation doesn't talk, on the whole, about predictions of future events.
But it does talk about currency. It says that people were not allowed to buy or sell unless they had the mark of the beast.
So what's the mark of the beast?
Well, we don't know. But it would be pretty convenient to have a one world currency system for that to happen?
So I think we can address this by looking at the part in Deuteronomy where God talks about Israel having his name on their head and on their hands. And the mark of the beast, what is that? Well, it is about having anything that is here or here. So your worldview or the work that you do that is not God. So if you are grounded in your thinking and your philosophy in anything that is other than the gospel of Jesus Christ, you have the mark of the beast on your head. If you are working and laboring for anything other than the glory of Jesus Christ, you have the mark of the beast on your hands. It is not talking about QR codes, microchips, tattoos, anything like that. But you see it more in, for example, this person is not complying with whatever the current social mores or the current philosophy of the age is, and therefore they should be fired. They're not allowed to work, and we're not going to do business with them. That is what we're talking about when we're saying they weren't allowed to transact.
Okay.
And that holds true across all time. Ancient Rome, Victorian England, some tribe in a forest somewhere today where people lose their jobs for speaking out of line.
So
Bitcoin actually reduces the potential for a quote unquote one world government because it takes away the power of governments at the moment to control their people through the monetary supply. The only reason that people work until they're, well, it used to be 60. Now, if we stay on a fiat standard, we're looking 75, if not into the ground. The only reason that happens is because governments print more and more money every year.
Huh.
So I'm not sure that it is a bad thing.
I'm just the reason why I'm skeptical is because it sounds like it would, in theory, would solve a lot of problems. But the more problems it sounds like it would solve, the more skeptical I am, because those problems they don't result from the currency itself. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I get that.
And we can see that like whatever new technology comes along, even if it gets adopted over time, it will be used for bad. So, like for example, with the fact that we can talk across space, like without any problems on the internet, like that is a good thing. But then it also makes everything more instant, which means people become more impatient.
Yeah.
And want things to happen more quickly.
Implications of
so like the technology is better in a lot of ways, but it produces other problems.
Yeah. So I agree. It goes to the point of Bitcoin's just used for money laundering and buying drugs. Well, if I'm a criminal or a terrorist, the last thing I'm wanting to actually do is put my transactions on an immutable open source ledger that anyone can read, right? Even if it would be difficult to trace, it's not impossible. It's not completely anonymous. And I think over time you will see, especially governments, accessing ways of tracing transactions like that. Because actually it's a gift to them, it's a ledger that anyone can read.
But if anyone can read the ledger,
mm-hmm.
like even though at the moment governments are obviously well, they don't like perhaps don't like Bitcoin because obviously it goes against the system they've got. But if a government was to adopt the Bitcoin system,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they are still the ones enforcing the law, right? So the currency itself doesn't enforce the law. But if a government was to say, you have to spend your money in such a way that you're using Bitcoin in this way, otherwise this and this is going to happen, and they can see what you're using your Bitcoin for, like that's the perfect controlling system.
It's far more likely that they would introduce something like a universal basic income, or kind of like a digital currency of their own, where that is completely programmable fiat money, where they can. So the thing with Bitcoin is you don't have control over what other people spend it on, right? So you can't actually enforce something because it's completely permissionless network. I don't have to ask permission for moving X amount of value from a bank, a government, or anyone else. I start the transaction and it happens. No one can stop it. With a central bank digital currency, they can control what happens, and you best believe it, they would do. They would, in order to tinker with the kind of macroeconomic models, could give a favourable interest rate on a bank account to a student, and a retiree who's got more than they should, more than's fair for them to have. It's fairly sinister. They could put a kind of rate on their account which reduces it by 5% a year to encourage them to spend. Forget about the idea of passing wealth down to your children and grandchildren, which is a distinctly biblical idea as well.
But then if you get a government that has a certain agenda, and
all of them do.
Let's say everyone in the world is on Bitcoin, and there's a government that says, we can see what you purchased with Bitcoin. This is the consequence, right? Then even though you're allowed to, the system itself allows you to do that on the Bitcoin system, the consequences would be that the government would act against you.
By the time we're on a Bitcoin standard, government as it currently exists won't be able or inclined to say that.
Why?
Because it challenged to the existing status quo, because it essentially makes every individual their own bank, and outside of the direct influence of fiat monetary policy, a government who has already adopted Bitcoin has moved away from that old order of thinking and doing. So,
but the reason for why they would present those consequences is not to do with the money.
What's their agenda that they would want to do that?
So let's say a government wants you to, let's say if you purchase a book that talks about how being gay is wrong, right? And the government's agenda is like, you can no longer say that being gay is wrong, then there would be a consequence for the fact that you bought that book with Bitcoin. So the money is irrelevant in the sense of what the system of money is. The point is, because it's so open, they can regulate your life based on what you buy or sell.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I've made it sound too easy for people to track what goes on, because unless you actually tell someone your public key, they can't associate it with you as an individual. They can see what transactions are being made, but there's no information on what the transaction is for. There's no associated information.
But I'm sure someone can crack that.
The transaction. I'm sure they could, but ultimately, that takes more processing power than the entire Bitcoin network uses anyway.
Just throw in some AI, it's fine.
No.
Like,
that's the point we start talking hypotheticals, I think.
But do you see how it makes me wary that
I do
that it would produce a one world currency, like regardless of any kind of biblical interpretation, that is setting up a human unity that does not sound right. Because any, I don't know, it's just my thing of anything one world I just disagree with. Like any idea of this would produce a better system, but we need it to be one world. Like, I mean, that is worrying.
I think what it does is, I mean,
because with the sorry, I keep butting it. But with just one more thing, like with the internet, it is a worldwide system, but it is simply a connection tool. So it's not it doesn't have the same, well, I don't know. It connects the whole world, but it doesn't affect how certain things are being run in a certain place necessarily.
I think the same is true. I think you just apply the principles of the internet to value instead of information. It doesn't require a single overarching body to run it, because it's completely permissionless. People transact with who they want, how they want, when they want, which I think is how it should be.
Yeah, I don't know. So we'll have to see how it pans out.
So yeah, I think my thing is it's incredibly early. The upside is insane, and I am pretty much as all in as I can go on it.
So how much Bitcoin? So the £7,000 you said, how much Bitcoin is that worth?
I would prefer not to answer that question.
Fair enough.
It's a significant amount and will be sufficient to ensure generational wealth.
Okay. So because it's not centralized and you have all these nodes, that means that the Bitcoin system can't just collapse because the servers are down, kind of thing.
It won't. It's had a 99.998% uptime since its inception. Yeah. It doesn't go down. It won't go down. It can't go down. It can't be hacked. It can't be altered. If you're talking about governments kind of taking on Bitcoin, there's a massive kind of game theory element there, which is essentially whoever moves first wins. I would not be surprised if the world's superpower in 25 years is not America anymore.
Well, that's certain at this point.
Sure. Or the UK, well, certainly not the UK. It'll be a smaller nation that decided to accumulate Bitcoin sooner than anyone else.
Hungary.
My brother, very possibly. But we'll stop the recording there if that's all right.
Yeah, that's fine.